Welcome back to Close Up. It is one of the busiest times of the year at the State House as lawmakers make their big push to get bills from the Senate to the House and the House to the Senate on deadline. Here this morning to discuss some key issues are the Senate Majority and Minority Leaders, Senator Jeb Bradley and Senator Donna Soucy. Thank you both for joining us. So right now the cost of everything is going way up for Granite Staters, most notably food and gasoline. A couple of high-profile speeches to end the week. Governor Chris Sununu said he'd be open to suspending the rooms and meals tax and the gas tax. You've got a big surplus at the moment, so Senator Bradley, are you going to make this happen?
No, look, I think the price that everybody has to pay for food, for groceries, gas, is out of sight. I think the answer on energy is for America to produce a lot more energy and make it clear that we're going to do things like reopen the Keystone Pipeline, get leases underway on federal lands, open up ANWR again. You know, if we do that right away, if Congress and the president move on that, I think you'll see the price of gas come down and stay down, you know, in fairly short order. I think that's much better than a temporary measure to, you know, lower the gas tax. Energy clearly is a tremendous burden on hardworking New Hampshireites right now, but we have to be smart about energy policy.
Senator Soucy, how about you? Would you be on board with tax holidays that the governor is kind of floating out there right now?
Well, I don't know that they'd really have that much impact. I think what we need to focus on is the big oil companies and the leases that they hold, their ability to increase capacity. And instead of just letting prices rise and putting more money into their stockholders' pockets, what they need to do is just ramp up production. And that can happen right away, and that will help to ease the burden that New Hampshire families are feeling.
So DCYF is back under the microscope due to this tragic case out of Manchester, Harmony Montgomery. Even though the governor had previously pointed the finger at Massachusetts, the report that came out clearly identified that there were some breakdowns in the process here in New Hampshire as well. Senator Soucy, this happened in your hometown. What needs to be done to fix DCYF so we're not back here talking about these same issues another 5 years from now?
Well, truly a tragic situation. The examination of the department, I think, continues. The department has been stressed for a long time. It suffers from staffing shortages, just like so many businesses do in our state. But I do think more needs to be done. We need to continue to work to ensure that children don't fall through the cracks as this terrible incident, I think, clearly demonstrates.
Senator Bradley, you guys have been working on this issue for a long time. Do you think there's merit in revisiting this idea that former Senator Gatsis brought up at the Executive Council meeting this last week of breaking up HHS, making DCYF its own separate agency?
You know, I think that there could be a discussion about that, but I think it also needs to be said on a bipartisan basis. Over the last several years, we have adopted the children's care system and dramatically increase the number of staffers that we have authorized and funded at DCYF. The problem is trying to retain people. Once they come in, they get trained, they leave for another job. We have many, many unfilled positions. And I think that goes back to, the pandemic and people being paid not to work and things like that we're trying to struggle through to get these positions filled. I think when we do that, we've instituted the type of reforms that are necessary to protect kids, but filling those positions is absolutely essential.
Let's get to redistricting and specifically the congressional maps. Senator Bradley, you have a unique perspective here, having served CD1 in Congress back in the day. Will you have a floor amendment on Thursday to try to make the maps more competitive, as Governor Chris Sununu has requested?
I think that remains to be seen. There are discussions underway right now with the governor's office and others about redistricting, and, we'll see what happens.
Senator Soucy, what's your perspective on this? Is the Democratic caucus ready to potentially back at this time, unseen Republican amendment that might be only slightly less onerous than the so-called, what Senator Perkins Coker called the lobster claw map?
Well, I can't comment on something I haven't seen, so I certainly can't commit the caucus to anything, but I can tell you that in committee, I offered a very simple floor amendment. It would have removed one town, the town of Hampstead, from one district and put it in the other, and it would have made the districts within 51 voters. 51. I mean, that's like 0.1% deviation from the two districts. So there's no challenge here. This is a pretty easy fix. If the focus is on the numbers and balancing them out, there was absolutely no reason to make that wholesale change to the districts.
Senator Bradley, the House has a raft of marijuana legalization bills that it's dealing with. There's really only one that matters if it makes it to you, and that's the one the governor has referred to as having the, quote, right structure. So what do you think of this idea of making New Hampshire a cannabis control state? Does that have any traction with you?
Yeah, hard to say what it would fare in the Senate. Look, we're in the middle of a drug epidemic, and we still have, because of the border situation in the Southwest and fentanyl coming across the border and killing, so many New Hampshire people. I don't know, and I don't think that now is the right time, if ever the right time, to legalize marijuana. Let's remember what we've done. We've made medical marijuana available to people. We've also decriminalized a small amount of marijuana. So I think, given the difficulty of the drug situation and the fentanyl and heroin crisis that we have in New Hampshire, I don't think this is a very good time to consider legalizing marijuana.
So, Senator Soucy, the idea would be the state has its own cannabis shop storefronts like the liquor control system that we have. Perhaps New Hampshire could become a destination, as some say, for low-cost, high-quality cannabis. But you're an attorney. Could we really put state employees in the position of selling what would still be a federally illegal drug?
Well, that's the problem with this legislation. I think we do have an excellent liquor store model. There's no question about it. We're a control state. We do it very effectively. But to suggest that cannabis could be part of this system, I really think is a mistake. As Senator Bradley said, and I agree, we've taken steps to expand medical marijuana. We have decriminalized trace amounts of marijuana, and we can continue to fine-tune those things, but I don't think now is the right time to do full legalization of marijuana, and particularly to have the state being the seller.
Senator Bradley, there's been a lot of discussion about making adjustments to the Fetal Life Protection Act that passed in last year's budget trailer bill. So what do you see as getting across the finish line in terms of what will change and go to the governor's desk?
Look, I think the vast majority of New Hampshire citizens support a ban on late-term abortion right up until the moment of birth. We needed to clarify the ultrasound requirement. The Senate passed that. I think that should go to the governor, but anything that would undermine the ban on abortion right up until the moment of birth, I don't think the Senate's going to pass, nor should it.
Senator Soucy, obviously the Democrats are looking for more restrictions to be added in. What's your perspective here?
Well, this was an issue that was hotly debated, but it was an issue that slipped in the budget. And I think as New Hampshire voters are starting to learn that it slipped in and just how egregious it is, how limiting it is, they're very, very concerned. There's no question. We've seen polling to indicate that people believe that women should be able to make choices with their physicians and with their families. And, to the issue of late-term abortion, that's something that keeps coming up. It doesn't happen. Medical professionals don't simply abort for the sake of doing it. It's beyond the pale. But there are real circumstances for New Hampshire families, for New Hampshire women, where they struggle with the issue of a fetus being so sick, so deformed that they're not going to survive. And that viability issue is one that's tragic for a family. And the fact that we have no exception for it in this abortion law, I think is just terrible policy and a shame for the citizens of the state of New Hampshire.
So both of you are known as crucial deal makers in Concord. It's not always partisan warfare up there. I did want to get to one bill. It's a little deep in the weeds, but it's interesting. You two engineered compromises on these two pieces of legislation on manufactured housing and condo and homeowners associations and how they work. Give us a little rundown of what's going on here, starting with Senator Bradley.
Well, first of all, both Senator Soucy and I have been champions of affordable housing for a long period of time, and I think we both recognized how important it is. What we wanted to do is make dispute resolution at the board level of any condo association, homeowners association, or manufactured housing park part of the bylaws. So that was Senate Bill 324 and House Bill 210. We wanted to clarify the voting requirements of how you become a resident-owned manufactured housing park community. There were a lot of details, a lot of need for working together. Senator Soucy and I spent much of the last month talking about this, and I think we've come up with a really good compromise that protects the rights of people to be able to purchase a resident-owned community and also bring complaints to a condo board.
And Senator Soucy, what's going to be the real-world impact here for people?
Well, I think what should be the real world impact is, particularly in mobile home parks, is that more people will have a say in the process. If they want to be able to be a resident owned community, I think that's great. But I think that a significant number of the residents need to be at the table making that decision and then self-governing themselves once they do so. And we also put in some provisions that I think are real consumer protections to ensure that if people don't become part of the association or aren't part of the group that's organizing it, that they're not charged significant fees for their rent increase as opposed to those that do participate in the process. So the other thing with the condo resolution issue is that we have heard over and over and over again in the Commerce Committee complaints from various groups around the state that they can't resolve issues. So I'm hoping this is a first step towards trying to make sure that these folks have a place to go.
All right, Senator Soucy and Senator Bradley, thanks for joining us this morning on Close Up.
Thank you, Adam.